Right, there's one thing that I really think the modern world should but doesn't teach us, and that is that life itself is a mind game. The world that all of us live in here is psychological. It's a consequence of our own unique mindset, right? And that means that the quality of the things that we experience here on Earth are a consequence of the ways that we think about, feel, perceive, and interact with the world around us. And for that reason, here's 7 mental models and ways of looking at the world that have hugely improved my experience. Let's go. 1. Invert the complex to find the simple. I think that all of us have a tendency to overcomplicate our lives, and I think you will relate to that, right? And we often think that we need complex solutions to complex problems. But what I've realized recently is that happiness, productivity, fulfillment, these things are much more easily found through simplicity. An idea that combines the thoughts of Warren Buffett and George Mack is called inversion, which takes complex problems like mental health, a goal, a relationship, and offers us a simple solution to tackle them. Basically, you take something that you want in your life and you think about the exact things that would need to happen for the opposite of that thing to take place. You then avoid those things and try to do the inverse. Let's take happiness as an easy example to understand. If I wanted to guarantee that I would be absolutely unhappy, absolutely miserable, I would make sure that I never got the sleep that I needed. I would completely give up on my short and long-term goals. I would never exercise, and I would completely isolate myself from my social circles. And this thought experiment, this inversion, helps me to realize that happiness might not be as complex as it originally seems. Most of happiness might just be as simple as getting good sleep, working towards some goals that matter to me, having a good social life, and exercising consistently. And those are things that I can actually do that are mostly in my control. It's far easier to imagine what you definitely don't want and do the opposite than try and tackle the complex task of getting what you do want. 2. Be patient in the macro, but impatient in the micro. In the book Same as Ever, author Morgan Housel talks about how the first rule of happiness is to have low expectations, which I think is very, very true on the surface. But the question that I've been asking myself over the past few months is, given that that is true, how do we best manage our expectations? How do we be, say, ambitious yet content? How do we want more from ourselves but also feel good enough? How do we set goals without becoming a slave to them? Well, in the business world, there's a guy called Gary Vee, and he had this idea that we must be patient in the macro, but impatient in the micro. What this meant to him is that in your business, you should be extremely patient with the macro, long-term results of your business, say in the next 10 years. But you should also be extremely impatient with the work in the micro, in the daily, the things you do today within the business. But I like applying this idea more in all of the areas of life, right? We have to be patient in the long term, but impatient in the short term. We have to be patient with the outcomes of what we do, but impatient with the effort that we put in. And that, I think, is how we manage our expectations. And this is because the expectation is set on the micro, on the thing that we can actually control, which is today. And the macro, long-term results will take care of themselves as a consequence of what we've been doing in the micro. Expectations managed. 3. Be careful of the promises you make with yourself, because to have any level of self-respect, you have to keep them. I want you to imagine 2 fighters for a moment that are both preparing for a match against one another. The first fighter always turns up to training on time, consistently, and always keeps the promises that he makes with himself, whereas the other fighter tends to miss sessions and doesn't keep to the standards that they have set for themselves. When it comes to fight day, despite the 2 different approaches to training, both of these competitors have relatively equal skill. But who do you think will be able to trust themselves in the midst of the fight? It will only be the fighter who kept the promises with himself and turned up when he didn't need or want to, that will prevail. Because I think it's very, very important in life that we trust ourselves. We spend the majority of our time, the majority of our life in our own minds with ourselves. And most people set promises that are way too large that they're incapable of doing. And the problem with this is that once people see that they cannot maybe keep to a promise that they set for themselves, they then give up on the hope of ever being able to change and ever being able to make their lives better than they are now. Jordan Peterson has this brilliant idea that we should treat ourselves as someone we are responsible for helping. And this means we have to set promises with ourselves that are worthwhile and achievable. but also making the effort to keep as little unmet promises as we possibly can. And through that, you will then know what you are capable of doing, and through that, know what you want from yourself. And over time, then you will have greater respect and trust and admiration with who you are, because you know you do what you say you're going to do. 4. Trajectory is more important than position. If you take two separate sports teams, I want you to imagine that one team has just been promoted to the top league in their country. And I want you to imagine that the other team has just finished 4th in that top league, when the previous season they actually finished 1st. Now, given these two different scenarios, which team's players, fans, and team staff do you think are going to be feeling the best? One team is clearly above the other objectively, but subjectively they are on completely different trajectories, which means one team feels like they are losing and one team feels like they are winning. I've learned recently that momentum is the energy that defines how we feel in our life. It's not necessarily about something being good, really. What it's about is something being better than it was before. In pretty much every discipline and every domain of your life and every single thing that you do, it is so much better to be rising up and becoming better than remaining at the top or remaining in a good position when you will eventually fall. So to be mentally healthy, we have to, in some way, in some part of our life, be striving to be better and to improve. Because it's never really about getting there. It's about getting there. 5. What you resist persists. I think I've learned recently that problems that we avoid in life get bigger. The dust that you brush under that carpet will eventually come back to hurt you as a sandstorm. Therefore, avoiding the problems and avoiding the discomfort that we have in life is a very awful strategy of navigating psychological well-being. The best way to approach the problems that we all do have in our lives, let's be honest, is to take on the lion cub before it becomes a fully grown lion. What I mean is, take on a problem early enough when it is more manageable before it becomes a monster. And sure, this will come with its own physical or psychological discomfort, but it is worth it, right? Because over time, if you wait long enough, a small pain can eventually become something that takes on and ruins your entire life. To use a real concrete example, it's so much better to confront the difficult, uncomfortable conversation with a friend or partner about why you don't think the relationship is working, rather than waiting in the shadows for years until eventually the relationship just goes up in flames. And similarly, it's a far better approach to look after your health and do the small bits of discomfort that are required for that, rather than waiting until the monster of chronic disease potentially gets its claws around you. These are micro doses of discomfort now to keep the long-term demons away. 6. It's far easier to have a good day with a to-don't list rather than a to-do list. I've realized that most days of my life will go bad if I do the wrong things, rather than if I avoid doing the right things. And also, if I avoid doing the wrong things, then I'll end up doing the right things anyway. So to me, having a to-don't list, a list of things that you definitely do not want to do that day, is actually much more useful than having a to-do list. For example, the most important thing I've found to have a good day and be present and happy is for me to have control over my attention. So having the task on my to-do list of keep hold of my attention isn't really very helpful, because it's quite broad and it's not really obvious what that means. Whereas it's much more useful to have a to-don't list saying, don't start doom scrolling, don't take your phone into the bathroom, don't watch YouTube till you finished a task, things like this. Because what I've come to realize is that life fundamentally is a beautiful thing if you avoid the ugly. If you avoid putting yourself in negative moods and negative states of mind through doing the things you wish you wouldn't. Avoiding blunders makes good moves so much easier. 7. We don't live in a world of facts, we live in a world of narratives. Everything, absolutely everything that you consume is trying to push a narrative on you, not an objective, rational fact. The news, other people, the media, even this video has a narrative behind it, and that can be either good or bad. The important thing to recognize, I think though, is that life itself is best seen as a story. Your life is not a series of facts from your birth to your death. Your life is a combination of plots and scenes and characters. In fact, psychologist Carl Jung said that everybody lives out their own myth, i.e. their own mythical story. And you might want to figure out what your myth is, because right now you might be living out a tragedy. and you might not want it to be. Realistically, it's not going to be possible to avoid being influenced by the narratives around you and avoid the story of your life being molded by the external forces out of your control. But what is possible, I think, is to pay attention to the narratives that you are being exposed to in your life. What kind of stories do you want to believe about yourself and act out in your life? For me, I think the best way to frame the story of my life is as the hero myth, against evil and against adversity. And for me, it's also incredibly important that I have a level of agency to control the narratives that I believe and act out in my life, rather than just be a part of them. And it's also important to me that my story is something worthy of reading. Those were 7 ideas that have improved the way I think about the world. And if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more ways that psychology can help you feel and perform better in your life, you can watch the rest of my videos by starting with this one here. Thank you so much for watching.